Hello everyone. So, today we're going to discuss something that is very, very difficult when it comes to Yu-Gi-Oh! For most newcomers, and a thing that I have seen a lot of grievances around in particular over the past week or so, and that's going second. And when it comes to going second in Yu-Gi-Oh! It could be really hard, I'm not going to lie. For a newcomer starting up the game, and you go in, and your opponent gets to play 20 cards, you take 10 minutes to resolve their turn, and at the end you have to play against like 3 negations and a trap card and you don't know what to do. It feels really bad. It feels like you just lose and you're getting punished and you didn't even get a chance to do anything. And this can feel overwhelming. What isn't very well conveyed by the games, unfortunately, is that the modern Yu-Gi-Oh! Has a lot of cards that are designed to help make this entire process a lot more bearable. And one of the biggest things we're going to start with first is hand traps. Hand traps are cards, usually monsters, despite the name, that have the effect to activate in hand or be discarded to prevent your opponent from doing things. They make going second easier because they limit how much your opponent can do while they're going first. And these, what they do is they make simplified game states. They reduce the amount of things you have to run over. And if you reduce the amount of things you have to run over, suddenly this game is way more playable, way more interactive. And that's where a lot of the fun comes in, is the back and forth after you have sort of broken down the hardest stuff and now have to resolve things one-on-one properly. Without further ado, we'll start getting into some of these. Starting off with the hand traps, we have the most impactful one of all, Maxi. Maxi is a card that is very meta-defining, and it has a very simple but strong effect. When your opponent special summons, you draw 1 card. All you have to do is discard it on either player's turn. Anytime your opponent's special summons after that for the rest of the turn, you draw 1 card. This card will make some people just stop their turn early, and everyone has to kind of build around it, because if you don't, sometimes you just lose to this. It's scary. You don't want to get hit by that. Drawing into your card gives you more resources to go second, and lets you draw into your other hand traps to disrupt your opponent. I would say, if possible, this is the first thing you should craft. Like, out of any hand trap, this is the first thing you should definitely get. So most decks are running at least 2 to 3. You want to look into that. It is something you also want to definitely be ready to fight against, because this card can also wreck you just as bad as you can wreck your opponent with it, and it's scary. I'll be honest, it's scary. It's something that a lot of players in the West haven't had to deal with, because in the TCG, which is the Western branch of it, it's been banned. But in Asian territories and OCG, this has been legal at 3 forever. So definitely watch out for this one. Another very good generic one is Ash Blossom and Joyous Spring, and what it does is anytime your opponent activates a card that adds from hand to deck, special summons a monster from deck, or sends from deck to graveyard, you activate it in response, it negates it, and they lose it. It does not negate the activation, noteworthy. So cards that are 1 activation per turn, that can only be used once per turn, if they get their activation negated, you could use them again because they never actually got their activation. But because it only does the effect, they lose their activation, so they don't get a redo. Very good, very generic. Hits most decks. It's a bit of a gatekeeper card. It checks rogue decks super hard. So that's another really good to look into. I'd say it's the second best one. Arguably, there's another contender for that. Infinite Impermanence. For those of you who have played in 5D's era, you might be familiar with Effect Veiler, which Effect Veiler also explained in a sec. Infinite Permanence, if you control no cards on either player's turn, lets you target 1 monster the opponent controls, negate its effects until the end of turn. And if you use it as a face-down card, as a regular trap card, it also prevents them from activating, or rather, it prevents their effects of whatever spell and trap card happens to be behind them from activating that turn, which is easy to play around, but a lot of people forget about that too. It's pretty good, it's very handy. Unlike Effect Veiler, which we'll get to in a sec, Effect Veiler is a similar effect on your opponent's main phase. You can send this card from hand to grave, target 1 of their effect monsters, and negate face up for the rest of the turn. Infinite Impermanence is similar, but 1, it is a trap card, which means that it can avoid certain specific things. 2, and this is the other thing, it doesn't have to be on your opponent's turn. Going second after they have an established board, you could use this to stop 1 of their big monsters or something. This is very good against things like Mecha Buff, for example. Just big negation, big disruption cards you could just target and negate. And neither of these are once per turn. That's a big thing, is Ash Blossom is a hard once per turn. If you draw 2 of them, you're not getting both of them that turn. Effect Veiler and Infinite Permanence are not. They're very good, very handy, would absolutely recommend. Infinite Permanence is honestly arguably the second best one behind Max C. Sometimes it's better than Ash Blossom, sometimes Ash Blossom is better. These two are just universally very good, especially in a game where there is no side decking, it's a best of one, so you have to prepare for pretty much any deck. Ghost Spell and Skullmeister are both the anti-grave hand traps. Both of them are very, very good at what they do. Ghost Spell is like Ash Blossom except with graveyard effects. If you try to add back from grave to hand deck or extra deck, you just stop them. You try a special summon with a Monster Reborn or something, you stop them. And if they activate a card that effect vanishes from the graveyard, say Called by the Grave, Different Dimension Crow, any of those cards, you stop them. It's good. It's very good. I would recommend that one too. You have Skullmeister, which is a simpler effect. It's also not once per turn. When your card effect is activated in your opponent's graveyard, you send this card from the hand to grave, negate it. It stops grave effects. It's simple. It's pretty good. Another very, very handy anti-graveyard card that is seeing a lot of play because of Lyraless being a common thing. Different Dimension Crow. You can discard this card and target one of your opponent's cards in the grave and banish it. It's simple. It prevents them from getting the resources back. It prevents them from activating effects. It is very handy. It's a little low impact, but it does a lot. Other notable one here, Ghost Ogre and Snow Rabbit. I feel like the other Ghost Girls are worth talking about in their own right, but they're not really as relevant. But Ghost Ogre is the one most likely to be relevant out of those. Ghost Ogre and Snow Rabbit has a simple effect of when your opponent activates a monster or spell or trap effect that's already a card on the field, like a continuous spell, a field spell, a trap continuous, or just a monster effect in general. You target it, you destroy it, simple. It removes that thing. It's very obnoxious for decks that have to use a specific continuous card or field spell. It loses their monster. It's handy. You also, just in the more high impact end, you've got Sideframe Gear Gamma. Sideframe Gear Gamma is one you have to run kind of maxed out. Unfortunately, it's only at 2 right now. And you also have to run one copy of the Sideframe Driver, because what it does is when your opponent, if you control no monsters, when your opponent activates a monster effect, you can special summon itself and the copy of Driver, and doing both of those will just slap the monster out and destroy it and negate it. And sometimes that just ends turns. It's very good. It is bricky though, and especially with that too, it's a little bit harder to recommend, though I still personally quite like it. But you do have to run the Driver brick, and that is a bit of an off-putting thing for newcomers. Droll Lockbird is one other one that's really noteworthy, but it's a little bit format dependent. And what it essentially does is go, if your opponent adds cards from deck to hand, you discard it and it says you can't do that anymore for the rest of the turn. Some decks hate this, some decks don't care. It's more of a side deck card, but no side decking, so that hurts it. But its effect is so powerful that's worth looking into despite that, because a lot of decks do just lose to this sometimes. And lastly, Nibiru, the Primal Being. This is one that is interesting, but I don't feel it's as good as it could be. And what it does is say that if your opponent normal special summons 5 or more times this turn, you can tribute all monsters on the field to get rid of them, and special summon itself and a token with the combined stats of everything that was, removed. And it's very scary, but also I feel like because of Max C, most people are already prepared to go up against this thing. And most people have already kind of embedded, like, hey, don't summon too much unless you have a way to deal with this thing. So it's okay. The fear of it existing is stronger than the actual card a lot of the time. So a lot of people will play cautiously to avoid this. Continuing on, in terms of other stuff besides hand traps, there's a wide variety of options. Some of these are a lot more budget than, hand traps. Most of them are very high rarity, and that's kind of obnoxious. That's very obnoxious, actually. But there's other options here. A lot of these are high rarity too, but there's some alternatives that you could use. So first off, we're going to talk about sort of general board wipey cards. Cards that destroy spells and traps en masse and get rid of big problem monsters and cards. The most iconic, Raigeki, followed by Dark Hole. Dark Hole is only a super, so it's easy to craft. Raigeki is an ultra, but it is literally given to you as part of the tutorial. So very easy board wipe card. And what they do is Raigeki just destroys all your opponent's monsters, no caveats. While Dark Hole destroys all monsters on the field, also no caveats. These two are just very, very good standard destruction cards, and I'd recommend them. Harpy's Feather Duster is also a pretty good card, and it's also part of a sort of trio with other spell and trap card destruction cards, but like Raigeki, destroys all of a specific type, in this case spells and traps. These two are a little bit interesting. They're old school cards, they're at 1, and they destroy a specific type of card in mass. Ultra is unfortunately, Ultra. Harpy's Feather Duster is unfortunately not a card that you get for free, but it's pretty worth using. We have Lightning Storm, which is a bit of a hybrid of the two with some limitations. You have to control no face-up cards, so this is specifically for decks that want to go second. And it destroys either all attack position monsters your opponent controls. That's a keyword, attack position. This means there's more counterplay against it than Raigeki. Or destroy all spells and traps your opponents control, which is a duster but with a lot more limitations. It's very good in the early game when you're going second. It's kind of dead in the mid game where both people have something on board a lot of the time. So it's whatever. Sometimes, but it does come in a bundle. It does have some very good applications for decks that really want to go second. It's very format dependent. Sometimes it's really good and sometimes it's bad. Unfortunately, the lack of side decking does mean it does fall behind a little bit. In terms of other spell and trap removal, for the budget players, Mystical Space Typhoon is pretty easy to craft. It's a rare. And it's a simple effect. Target one spell or trap on the field, destroy that card. It's a quick effect, which brings us to our specific triangle of quick effect spell and trap removal. Because cards like Vanity's Emptiness, Skill Drain, and Imperial Order don't let you play, and you want to be able to prevent them from getting their effects off. Because they are continuous traps, you have to stay on the field to resolve their effects. Quick effect removal like this is able to prevent that from happening. So you could start off, you could bait out the effect, you expect them to throw a Skill Drain at you in Imperial Order, they flip it, and then you chain these, you activate these in response, and you pop. And that's pretty good. That's pretty good to stop that, but I digress. It's also a reason why not to instantly default to Feather Duster as much as it looks appealing. Twin Twisters is Mystical Space Typhoon. It's a super, which is fairly affordable. It's a super. You discard one card and target up to 2. So that's very handy. That is very, very handy. And I would also recommend looking into that one. I personally my favorite right now, though I think the next card is going to be better over time. Cosmic Cyclone, pay 1,000, target with spell and trap on the field, and banish. Very, very useful effect. It gets rid of cards like Eldritch stuff by banishing them, which prevents them from getting their grave effects, and it's going to get better over time, especially against decks where they have ways to protect themselves from destruction effects. If they can protect their back from destruction effects, this is pretty handy, and this will definitely get better with time, because there are going to be some cards that make trap decks a little bit scarier. A couple of other options, not necessarily spell and trap card removal, but just very, very good. For budget players, you got Forbidden Chalice, which targets one monster in the field, negates its effects, and gains 400 for the rest of the turn. This is pretty useful going second. It also is a good card to like set face down when you go first. Has a lot of applications, very flexible card even if it's small, and it's cheap, so I would recommend that quite a bit. Book of Moon. This one is a little bit slept on, and it's also in a similar state. You target one face-up monster, you flip it face down. It has a lot of applications to protect yourself from getting attacked by a monster. You can use it to prevent people from doing something like a Synchro, or an Exe summon, or a Link summon where their monster has to be face up. It's a nice little disruption. It prevents certain things from being hit by targeting effects. It's not the strongest card, but it is a very flexible card, and sometimes it's just so good. We have Forbidden Droplet, which is an Ultra, unfortunately. Very, very good card. Forbidden Droplet allows you to send any number of cards from hand or field to the graveyard. So your cards that you no longer really need, your spares, or just stuff you don't mind discarding. Discard it, non-targeting. Just pick as many effect monsters your opponent controls up to that, and their attack is halved and their effects are negated. The thing that makes this really scary is your opponent can't activate any type of cards that were used as discard fodder. So if you say, discarded a monster and a spell, they can't do anything with the monster or spell to deal with it. And that is really handy against unbreakable combo board decks. You just have to worry about things like Solemns that negate anything trap cards, but if you happen to just say discard all 3 types of cards, they just lose their stuff, and they kind of lose. It's quite good. It's really, really good. And it's one of the best options that are not, straight up board destruction. I have to mention quickly Super Polymerization. Very niche card, very deck specific, but what it does is in some formats, if you discard the card and lets you fusion summon from either side of the field, including your opponent's monsters, and they can't activate anything in response, decks like Invoked, like Shadal, and later on Despia, we're all going to have a field day with this card. A lot of generic decks, not as much, but it is useful. And one last card, though I think it's a little bit less effective in this because of the way it works. It's still good in going second decks. Evenly Match, which lets you, on the battle phase, activate effect, and this is a bit of a balancing thing to prevent you from OTKing. If you control no cards, you can activate your hand. You make your opponent banish face down, meaning they're pretty much gone. The same number of cards, and so they only have as many as you do, which, if you activate Evenly Matched from hand, they're gonna have to just choose their favorite and just sit on that, and then lose the rest of their board, and now you can play on main phase too. Pretty good, but you run this if you're expecting 100% to be going second a lot. Decks designed to go second, which does exist, Mech Knight, Hero, Bright Fur, various OTK decks, Dinos, sometimes Invoked itself. Decks that are designed to go second, really love this. And right here we have a suite of different options for Super Polymerization, since that was brought up earlier. Mud Dragon, Starving Venom, Predaplant, Dragos of Sepelia, Borreload, Furious Dragon. And I can't even pronounce this one, but you know what? It's there. These are good Super Poly targets. And archetypes like Invoked and Shadal have their own monsters that are generic enough that they can Super Poly. Overall, I'd say these are quite nice. Anything else I'd recommend? Not that I can think of. I guess if you're really feeling spicy, you can use Book of Eclipse. That's a pretty funny card. Book of Eclipse essentially lets you just set everything face down. And at the end of your turn, you flip that face up and your opponent gets to draw as many. So sometimes you could just use it as a very flexible board disruption or board wipe, but you do have to deal with the fact that your opponent will draw if you don't deal with those, so it's a bit fluctuant. Finally, at the end of this, we have Kaiju, or Kaiju-style effects, rather. Kaiju refer to a specific archetype of monsters that have very simple effects. They all have effects when they have their specific counters in the field. They're gained by their spells and traps, but those aren't particularly used. But on their own, what they do is a very simple thing. You can special summon this to your opponent's field by tributing one of their monsters. It does not destroy it, it does not target, it can't be responded to, because it's an inherent summon. It tributes it, and they lose it. And these are very good for a lot of reasons. They're also very budget for the most part. So there is a Kaiju also pretty much for every deck type. They're very just good for going second, frankly, against decks that use a lot of monsters. So we have generally the best one. If you just want to give your opponent a small monster that's easy to kill. Gamma Seal. Gamma Seal is pretty good. It's only 2200 attack, and you just run it over, and it's simple. It's handy. It's great. You also have Humongous, another small one. Both of these are supers, but they're pretty good. Radiant is also pretty good, and it's a rare. It's pretty good in generic. Galadara, both of them are reasonably easy to run over, and they're rare, so they're very budget. And in the case of Radiant, Radiant has the benefit of being a dark, so you can Lure of Darkness it in dark decks that run it. You have Dogoran, which Dogoran is mainly run in Dinosaur. And as a card in Dinosaur, it is pretty good. It's pretty good. I have mixed feelings on it. It could be useful. Thunder King. Thunder King is pretty easy to kind of craft. It's a rare. It's 3300. Same with Jizukiru. But Jizukiru is a machine, so it could have some synergies in Cyber Dragon as well. Both of these have their applications. They're both pretty good. They're pretty cheap. If you have disruption effects, their big attack doesn't matter. As far as other Kaiju-style effects of note, you have Lava Golem. Lava Golem can tribute 2. It's a big monster, though, but it's good in formats where you want to tribute more than 1 per Kaiju, if you want extra, like, bang for your buck. It also has a heavy restriction, so it's a little It's a little fussy. Prevents your normal summon. Spear mode is the most extreme equivalent in that attributes 3. You don't want to have to use this card though, and I'll tell you why, because any format where this card is good, probably not going to be the best format, I'll be real with you. It's a bit of a messy card, but it does its job quite well. Lovely. And if you happen to be running a lot of kaijus, you have access to another board wipe. It's a bit situational, mostly run using going second decks. Interrupted Kaiju Slumber. It does a Dark Hole effect, and then proceeds to summon 2 kaijus from the deck, one on each side. It's pretty handy in formats where board wipes are good. It has the extra benefit that you could banish it from grave after, the turn after, and use it to grab a kaiju. The ability to use it to grab a kaiju is also very handy in decks like Burning Abyss that can mill this card at will using a card called Beatrice. I say these are all good, and I say these are all very good budget options. With that said, I think there are a lot of options in Modern Yu-Gi-Oh! That are worth considering, and it is very much going to be based on playstyle and preference and deck type. But if you were struggling going second, look into your options, because you do have a lot available. And admittedly, some of them are rather on the expensive side. The hand traps are particularly so, though you don't have to run too many of them. I'd say look into what you have. There's various options for various budgets, various decks, various playstyles. Pretty much every deck has something they could use. I did forget one other little friend of mine here. Triple Tactic Talents. Triple Tactic Talents is a pretty funny one that is very much good for going first and going second, so I have to discuss it. The gist is, if your opponent activates a monster effect during your main phase, this includes being hand trapped, this includes going second and getting negated by a Mechaba or anything monster that has a big negate effect. To activate one of 3 banned cards, draw 2 cards, a Pot of Greed style effect, take control of 1 monster your opponent controls until the end phase, akin to Change of Heart, and look at your opponent's hand, choose 1 card from and shuffle it to the deck, akin to Forceful Sentry. This card is very, very handy, another good one, and any deck that's afraid of disruption should also look into this one. I do hope that further down the line, some of these options become increasingly available and easier to get, because it's unfortunate that a lot of these are very high rarity, but you make the best of what you have, and thankfully, if you've been planning well, you can get enough premium gems to kind of help you craft a lot of these easier. But with that said, hopefully this has been very helpful. Hopefully this is making the game a little more digestible to you, and hopefully to help you learn how to dismantle boards way better, because frankly, once you get over that learning curve of having to go second and having to figure out how to go second, the game becomes a lot of fun. But until then, it could be a bit of a pain, so you want to definitely look into this sort of thing. With that said, appreciate your time, thank you for listening through, and hopefully this has been helpful to y'all.